Policies are always the most important starting point. So policies are always the most important point, because managers should know policies. They won't necessarily know the law, but they should know policies. So I think it's important that reps start with policies. I always look at the law as a backup. I don't look at it as the be all and end all. The law often operates as a minimum. Think of the minimum wage. The minimum wage, if we relied on the law, that's what we'd all be on. If you look at the holidays, if you're a full-time employee, you're entitled to 20 days plus the 8 bank holidays. If you get more than 28 days and you're a full-time employee, well, then you get more than the law. So I think the law is a starting point. It shouldn't be the end point. But a lot of reps focus on the law. I think the law is okay, but if your policies are better than the law, then use it. And also, in my experience, when you use policies in workplaces, when you can say things like, on page 4, paragraph 5 of your policy, it says this, it makes more of an impact with managers, because managers know that you know the policy.
Hadi Naqvi from Tutor.
Everyone, it is me, Hadi Naqvi, the TUC's Organising Award winner of 2024, back with another episode of Unmatched, the podcast that brings together trade unionism, politics, business, and shows how closely intertwined they all are. My guest today is basically that guy that just doesn't talk the talk. He walks the walk, and more importantly, teaches those to follow in his footsteps. Having been in the trade union movement for over 31 years, he started off working within a retail environment, Sainsbury's, and was introduced to the trade union by an area organizer or union official for the trade union, which was recognized at the time, called USDOR. He became very active as a rep because his workplace never mentioned anything about trade unionism. They never mentioned that the trade union could help to represent in grievances and disciplinaries, and the management there at that time wasn't necessarily as nice and forward-thinking or helpful. And that helped to inspire my guest to become much more stronger, having attended every training session going. He improved and increased his union membership within his organization, his workplace. He then moved on into becoming a tutor for the TUC, as well as a lifelong project manager for USDOR for a short period of time. That helped to bring about USDOR's lifelong learning. My guest has taught numerous shop stewards and health and safety reps over those years, including myself. And more importantly, he has given back in more ways than one. He's totally unmatched in his field. I even gave him a shout out at the TUC Rep Connect in 2024, where many people were quite taken aback by it. So if you were a member of Unison, University College Union, GMB, or USDOR, this guy doesn't need any further introduction. But for those who don't know of him, you will today. This is my special guest, and I'm really proud to introduce Fred Behardien. Fred, how are you doing?
Hello, Hadi. How are you doing? Good to be here.
And it's great to have you here. And believe me, guys, when I say that it has been a journey to get him on the podcast, it has been a journey because he's so in demand. And, him and one of my other teachers, Sucha Singh, one of my mentors, very, very difficult to get guys like this on. So I can't say anything more highly about this guy. But Fred, thank you for taking time out to be in here today. And I wanted to basically take the time to explore a little bit about yourself, because you gave so many wise words of wisdom when you was teaching me that I took with me in my workplace environment to create a better environment. And you was right about many things. One of the things he was absolutely right about was how some managers would think it was their name on the door when it wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, I come across that a lot in all the workplaces I've worked in, where people kind of forget that they are employees. It doesn't matter who you work for. The people that you work for, the managers you work for, are all employees of the organizations that we are employed by. So maybe higher up the food chain than we are, but in terms of who they are, I'm an employee, you're an employee, they're an employee. And I think sometimes people forget that. Yeah, definitely. People sometimes kind of forget where they are in the positioning of a structure of a company or an organization.
So when you got started, I mean, obviously 31 years within a movement is a long time. It's a lifetime for a lot of people. When you got started, what made you say, I will become a member of this union and become a rep?
I was training to be a manager, Hadi. I was promised, I was about 22, 23 at the time, and I was promised a lot by the organization I worked for, Sainsbury's. I did everything that they asked of me, but unfortunately, in terms of what they offered me in return was very little. I didn't know a lot about the union. I used to train people, so I didn't know a lot about the union. All I knew was there was a union. It was called Usdaw. You could join it if you wanted to. And that was it, because that's all the organization told us. In terms of what the organization told us, that's what they told us. So one day the union did come in, an area organizer, a union official came in, told me about what the union offered. And I quite liked what the union offered. And so I thought, you know what, if I'm going to stay in this environment, I might as well protect myself, because I hadn't been treated very well in the organization. So I thought, I'm going to stay, then I might as well make sure I'm looked after. So I joined the union the day the union official came in. He then talked about being a union rep, which I didn't know anything about. But when he talked about what a union rep does, the function of a union rep, then I thought, you know what, I already do a lot of this stuff in my job. So it wouldn't be a particularly hard transition to go from being a trainer to being a union rep in the workplace. I kind of volunteered and got elected to be the union rep and the health and safety rep as well soon afterwards.
If you're hearing some noise in the background, Fred has his window open and people are doing a lot of maintenance around the area. So we do apologize for that, guys. But it is a hot day too. So, at the time of recording, we're still in the middle of a bit of a heat wave. So, bear with us. But yeah, so getting on with, your introduction to the union was as a trainer. You were trained to be a manager. A lot of unfulfilled promises. When you got elected as a rep, what was your sort of ambition as a rep? What was you envisaging at the time?
I just thought, you know what, if I was going to do the role, I wanted to do the role as effectively as possible, because when I took the role on, I thought, you've got to do a role like being a union rep, health and safety rep, you've got to give it 100%. If you don't give it 100%, then there isn't probably much point in doing it. So if you give 100% and you get it wrong, then at least people can't criticize you for what you haven't done, because you've done your best. And so myself and another one of my colleagues, I was a day shift rep and we had a night shift rep as well. We took it on board that we were going to take it on 100% or not bother. I can remember going to my first branch meeting, didn't have a clue about what a branch meeting was, because no one told me. Back in those days, you had to attend these meetings and basically you learn while you were there. So I learned very quickly what a branch meeting was, and then of course you go to a branch meeting, you get invited to things like regional conferences, you get invited to other events that the union's offering. Yeah, that'd be nice. I'd like to go to that. And of course, then you network with people as well. So you network with people at the branch, people you never met before. And of course, if you go to conference, you network with people that you've never met before, people that you would probably never meet in life because of the area they live in, maybe the fact that they're different types of people, but they've all got one common aim, that they're all keen trade unionists and wanting to push the trade union agenda forward in their workplaces.
Did you ever feel that your experiences were quite unique to your workplace, or when you went out and networked with other people, that you found that there was a bit of similarities?
I think the biggest thing I found when I started as a rep was I was quite young. I was 23. When I started, when I went to my first course, I was the youngest person by a very, very long way, probably by about 15, 20 years. I was the youngest person. So the biggest thing for me was kind of trying to fit in, first of all, because when you're 23, everyone over 30 feels like ancient, So, so
Yeah,
for
I've been
me,
there.
it was a case of, well, trying to fit in with people that were, that were that were a lot older, but of course, a lot more experience and can share that experience with me. And I learned a lot from the people that were around me. I spoke to a lot of people. I learned a lot from the people that were around me as well. So, yeah. But I've got to say that's not my view now in terms of people being ancient. In terms of when I was 23, that was my view then. So.
Of course, being in the workplace environment, so you and the night shift rep, what sort of problems did you tend to encounter? Did you have the Arthur Scargill mentality that the media would put out there about trade unionism, or was it a matter of that people just didn't know what trade unions do?
We hadn't had a union in our workplace for a very long time. So I think when you don't have a union established in the workplace, you'll get managers that almost kind of think it's their right to do whatever they want to do. So the biggest thing that myself and the other rep did when we came in was there are rules. There are policies, there are procedures, there's a staff handbook, but it's not just a case of, well, your staff and you follow the rules, but the managers don't. The rules are there for everyone. So therefore, if there are rules in place, then it's important to make sure that, everyone follows those rules. You can't just pick and choose what rules you choose to follow and what you don't choose to follow. If your policies are part of your terms and conditions of your employment, and therefore, everyone has to follow those policies. Or if not, face the consequences of their actions.
Which is quite interesting, because I know with Sainsbury's, when I was working in Sainsbury's back in the 90s, you're absolutely right. The managers were at sometimes a rule to themselves. When you started bringing people to account, what was the sort of reactions that you was getting from both your colleagues and the managers?
I think colleagues were pleased that there was finally someone there that was going to stand up for them. I think that was the colleagues' response. I think managers, I went from being a very popular person in the store that I worked in to being a very unpopular person very, very quickly. But what I would say to anyone that's a union rep, if you're popular with management, you're probably not doing your job properly. So maybe you need to rethink your position a little bit, So, yeah.
Well, I was quite fortunate that some of the guys that I recruited were managers, and they started holding that sort of, wait a minute, some of these things you guys aren't doing right kind of view. And
I just want to add something, actually, Hadi, that you just mentioned now, which I need to put into context. Sainsbury's in the 90s, managers weren't allowed to belong to the union in the 90s. So it was a case of it was only staff that could be members in the unions. Until the 1999 Employment Rights Act, Sainsbury's had an agreement where they would only represent staff and staff only. That would technically be illegal now, but in terms of back in those days, back in the 1994, only staff could join. They only recognised for staff to join the unions. Now, of course, anyone can join the union, but back in those days, only staff could join the union. If you're a manager, you couldn't join.
And this is what I'm talking about, guys. This is why he's one of the best teachers out there. Just off the bat, he knew the legislation, and put it into context. And this is the thing that we have had lacking in quite a few places, because some of the other tutors I've met were training you to be a part of the system, work within the part of the system. You didn't. You was like, look, this is where the weaknesses are. Spot the weaknesses and find how to change the weaknesses into strengths. And that in itself is a skill. The only other guy that I've known who's done that is Sucha Singh. Mike Kidd as well, who's another TEC tutor, very inspiring. But from my experience as learning, that's been from you and Sucha. It's a valuable lessons I took with me along the way when I started my trade union journey as a shop steward. You're absolutely right. You got popular with your staff members because you're finally giving them their rights and you're protecting them from people that could potentially be abusing their power. There were other, I know from my personal experience that there were managers that I had who didn't abuse their power and would actually call out some other managers and would put grievances and things like that against them, which was there because the trade union knew the trade union would back them up, which was really, really handy. But along the way, you developed yourself as well. So what made you change from the retail environment to becoming a tutor or a trainer for other trade unionists?
So I did lots of courses through Usdaw. I think I did everything going basically through Usdaw that I could at the time. So, I attended things like regional conferences, national conferences, Osdor Youth Weekend, Osdor Summer School. I did all the stuff, all the training that was available. And then I really enjoyed it. So I enjoyed the training, but I wanted more. So once the training was finished, I wanted more because I didn't want to just be an okay rep. I wanted to be the best I could be for the membership. So I did some training at Lewisham College. So Lewisham College had...
Hey content creators, this is my chance to do a quick review of a product I bought on a TikTok shop and I think you guys are going to love it. It's a green screen disc that fits on the back of a chair. It can fit to almost any surface, and if you've got a area like a flat or a single bedroom or a bedsit where you're living in where you've got no space, this is ideal for those who are using it for things like Twitch, streaming, or just general YouTube videos. Like so. So get yours in the TikTok shop today. I'll leave the link in here.
Opened up a trade union study centre in 1998. I think I was one of the first reps. Yeah, I was one of the first reps on the first courses there to be a union rep on a TUC course there. And that was in 1998. I really enjoyed that. I met people from other unions because the first time I'd actually met people from other unions apart from Osdor, representatives from other retail environments. Really enjoyed the experience. Did some more training, and then the opportunity came up to be a tutor. So I thought, you know what? Why not give it a go? In 2000, then I got a job as a tutor for South Thames College. So I was working in South Thames College, which at that time was based in Putney. So we were based in Putney High Street back in 2000. And I worked there for a year. And then I joined Lewisham College, which is probably where most people know me from, actually, out of all the colleges I've worked for, because I worked there for 14 years. So worked at Lewisham College in Deptford for 14 years and really established myself as a tutor more at Lewisham College than at South Thames.
Now, from your experience, because again, teaching people who are trade unionists may not necessarily be the easiest because you're dealing with adults to begin with who have gone through a certain education system, which is your state school or whichever system that you believe is the right one, private, public school education. Then you got your academic qualifications, GCSEs, O levels, A levels, so on and so forth. And now you're being taught at your adult life. How was the transition there, teaching in that sense? Because now you're dealing with people who may not necessarily respond in the same way.
Well, I'd trained people for 11 years. Before I got the TUC job, I'd trained people for 11 years. So I was quite used to being in front of an audience, doing things like workplace inductions. I used to do food hygiene training. I used to do things like, people needed training on machinery. I used to train people on that. So I was quite used to an audience of people. What I wasn't used to was teaching people. But I was used to kind of things like time factors. So the biggest thing that you have when you teach people is time. Also how you talk to people, how you react to people, and also how you interact with people as well. My own experience of education wasn't particularly good, hence the reason why I kind of spent 13 years working in Sainsbury's. But what I did learn working in Sainsbury's was good people skills. So how to talk to people, how to work with people, how to communicate with people in the best way possible. So that was kind of something that made my job a lot easier. Going from being a rep to being a tutor was, having an audience in front of you. The only thing was that, when you're a tutor and when you're a rep on a course, you're part of a big group. When you are teaching and you are leading the group, you're not part of the group. And that was something I found quite early on was very different. I've been on lots of courses, but of course, when you're at the front and the whole success or failure of the course is on your head, that's quite difficult to start with because, of course, people will obviously take the accolades, but they won't necessarily take the stuff that's pretty bad. So, it was a steep learning curve, but you know what? Like anything, if you want to work at it, you'll get there. It just takes a little bit of time to do the transition from being a rep to being a tutor is very, very different. But no, it kind of happened, it did happen, but yeah, I learned a lot of lessons along the way doing it. So, yeah.
Yeah, because you've taught Unison, you've taught, I think, members of Unite or GMB, some of the other major other reps from different unions out there, and they have it's not necessarily as specialized as maybe Usdaw is, where they focus on one particular environment, which is the retail environment, retail distribution, so on and so forth. So when you're teaching in more of switching between those kinds of things, how do you have a different set of personalities when you're dealing with different trade union reps from different organizations, or is there like a similarity or underlying, maybe a sense of honor or that kind of thing?
I think the I think the biggest difference when you're teaching different trade unions is the structure. The organizations are very different. So, for example, in Unison is very much branch based. Their branch is their workplace. In Usdaw, the branch is a multiple of workplaces. So in Unison, there's a very much a structure, a bit like my union, UCU. So the workplace is the branch, and therefore all the people that are in the branch are from the same workplace. Some other unions have different structures where you've got a multiple of workplaces in the branch. So I think with Unison, the terminology is different. So the terminology that they would use is different to, for example, some unions would call people a shop steward, like Usdaw does, Unison does, but other unions might call them a workplace representative. So if you work, for the GMB, they don't call them union reps or stewards, they call them workplace representative. But the general kind of term that the TUC uses is union rep. So I think the biggest thing is the terminology, also to know the dynamics of the union. So the GMB branch-based, Unison branch-based, UCU branch-based, Usdaw is more kind of general. So they're the kind of differences, is the terminology. The rules are different. What people pay for their subs is different. So, but in general, the message is generally the same. It's just maybe a few kind of minor details maybe adjusted. But in terms of the message is always the same.
Okay, so it seems like there's a similarity. There's an underlying theme that goes with pretty much all union reps that are out there, and that's quite nice to know. Now, I do understand with a lot of the union reps, because I've had this difficulty myself. Because when you go back into the workplace, it's trying to keep up to date with the legislations and things like that, to be on top of things. One of the key things that you constantly say is employment law. Company policies need to be either better than the legislation or on par with the legislation. Because if it's below the legislation, it's breaking the law, effectively. So
Yeah.
how, when a union rep now gets back into the world of work, how do they stay on top of things? Because I found that quite difficult.
Policies are always the most important starting point. So policies are always the most important point, because managers should know policies. They won't necessarily know the law, but they should know policies. So I think it's important that reps start with policies. I always look at the law as a backup. I don't look at it as the be all and end all. So the law often operates as a minimum. Think of the minimum wage. The minimum wage, if we rely on the law, that's what we'd all be on. If you look at the holidays, if you're a full-time employee, you're entitled to 20 days plus the 8 bank holidays. If you get more than 28 days and you're a full-time employee, well, then you get more than the law. So I think the law is a starting point. It shouldn't be the end point. But a lot of reps focus on the law. I think the law is okay, but if your policies are better than the law, then use it. And also, in my experience, when you use policies in workplaces, when you can say things like, on page 4, paragraph 5 of your policy, it says this, it makes more of an impact with managers, because managers know that you know the policy and maybe they don't. So, and quite
there's
often
been a few
managers don't
times.
know policy.
There's been a few
Yeah.
times,
So,
and
yeah.
I'm pretty sure my audience will be thinking the same thing. Yeah, well, I've done that. The manager didn't know what I was talking about. Yeah, we've all been there.
But then, do you know what? It doesn't matter if you work in a college, doesn't matter if you work in a school, whether you work in a college, doesn't matter if you work in a council. You'll find that most managers don't read policies, in my experience. There may be some that do, but the vast majority of them don't read policies. So therefore, if you read the policy and you go through the policy with your member, you prepare when you have your meetings with managers, then you're in a better place than probably than what they are.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because the thing is, with anyone within a business, you're focusing on the business. You may not be focused on the policies. You're focused on getting the day-to-day work done. And what I found with trade union reps, especially good ones, is that they've made it part of their day-to-day to find out policies, do the work. When they got their break time, read a little bit here, read a little bit there. Because if they're a good union rep, they're always going to be asked problems. The problems are going to come to them. And they have to have the answers to it. Because the managers, again, there's something that you taught me, which was about the torts of negligence. Because when I came to you, when I started learning about this, it's because certain things are taking place in my workplace environment where people were getting injured. And they were getting injured because of, well, they weren't being told that you couldn't do certain things. They were actually being encouraged to do certain things, which went against the Health and Safety at Work Act. I think it was 1971, because it put people into a position of lack of duty of care to the colleague. It put them into a position of Jesus Christ, I've forgotten the actual terminology, but in way of harm. It put you into harm's way. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's the terminology. In a harm's way, guys. So yeah, and you taught me that, look, certain things, even manual handling, needs to be looked at properly. And people weren't doing that. So, I wasn't a health and safety rep at that time, but I was using a lot of the health and safety acts to bring those kind of things into play. And that led to a high amount of investment to protect the workforce. Everyone benefited from it, including those who are non-union members. And I kind of
Probably don't realise is that health and safety does cost money. To do it properly does cost money. Not to do it would cost more. So if you're looking at someone losing their life, you're looking at someone losing a limb, someone breaking their leg, it's going to cost a lot more money, So in terms of health and safety, health and safety does cost, but the benefits outweigh the costs. But the benefits of having a safe workplace, having safe equipment to work with, making sure that people are trained properly, the benefits outweigh the costs. But of course, most employers will look at the cost of something, but the cost of not doing health and safety is far more than doing health and safety. So, I don't know, if someone gets their arm crushed or their leg crushed by a piece of machinery, it's going to be more expensive for that organization than just making sure they're trained properly or giving them the right equipment. They could be sued, they could face legal claims, they'll have to pay sick pay. So probably making sure they do health and safety in the first place is probably far cheaper and outweighs the costs in terms of, the benefits of health and safety far outweigh the costs.
Well, you're right, because, again, I'm not saying that to pander to you, because the actual Health and Safety at Work Act was brought into legislation because of exactly those things that had happened. One of them was actually a factory going up, I think in Scotland, up in flames because no risk safety assessment was done on the electrics. So the cost to the business was that it went bankrupt.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the thing about health and safety is quite often you'll see people say things like it's the health and safety police, or it's this, or it's that. But, the thing is that before the Health and Safety at Work Act, before the Factories Act in 1961, people used to die in workplaces. A lot more people used to die in workplaces than they do now. So when people say, well, it's the Health and Safety Fund Police, or it's this, or it's that, people need to remember those laws are in place to protect people, to make sure people go home after they've finished the day at work, to make sure they do go home rather than making sure they don't go home. Health and safety is very, very important, but of course it does cost, but not doing health and safety costs a lot more than doing it. So doing it effectively, long term will be a lot cheaper. People will be healthier. People will be more likely to work more effectively. Productivity will improve, which is all the sort of things that employers want. But you can't have better productivity. You can't have better, well-effective workforce by not investing in it. If you think about your car, if you had a car, you don't invest in the engine, you don't invest in servicing it. It will run, but you run it into the ground and eventually it'll cost you far more money than making sure you get it serviced and getting it MOT'd. So to me, a business is no different to having an engine in a car. The better you look after it, the better it's going to serve you long term.
So just, from your opinion now, why do you think trade unions with businesses, why do you feel that businesses are quite obstructive to having a trade union within their organization when there's a lot of benefits to having a trade union?
Hey everyone,
I got this massage gun from TikTok shop. I'm doing a quick review on it. So you have the gun itself. 4 different heads. And they're all worth it. Easy to fit on heads. Easy to turn on. And different settings. So whatever kind of job you do, warehouse, driving, if you're coming back from the gym, hard day at work, this is ideal. And easy, interchangeable. Even massaging, different muscle groups, different settings. And if you put more pressure on it, it will put more pressure on the muscle too. And this is really good value for money. I got it from the TikTok shop and you won't regret it. Costs less than £20. Compared to Amazon, over 50. So get yours on a TikTok shop today.
I think they'll probably look at control, probably the issue of control. You know, the idea that the union can have a say in the workplace would probably upset some business owners or some organizations. Having to pay people more obviously will eat into organizations' profits. Having a better trained and more motivated workforce. Sometimes managers will look at that as being something that eats into their control or their management structure. I would say a good employer has nothing to fear from a union being in the workplace. A bad employer, someone who treats people badly, doesn't comply with the law, doesn't comply with their own policies and procedures, they're an organization that would have something to worry about an effective trade union being in the workplace. But I think employers will look at it from a point of view of cost. They'll also look at it from a point of view of profit. They'll look at it from a point of view of control. All those things are not easy things for organizations to give up.
But having a trade union in place will help to retain profits. Because if you're investing properly,
Yeah,
then
long term, yeah. Long term, yes. Short term, no. So short term, it might cost you more money. Long term, it will probably save people a lot of money. So, I would say, if you give people decent pay, decent conditions, you motivate the workforce. You don't treat people like children. You treat people like adults. Well, then you're going to be more productive, but that initially might cost you more money. And what a lot of people don't realize is that, there's a lot of hidden costs in business. So, for example, I look at sickness as being a hidden cost. So, for example, Hadi, if you're off work or I'm off work, okay, my employer might have to pay me a week's sick pay, 2 weeks sick pay. They might have to pay someone else a week's pay to cover me. They might have to pay someone a week's pay or 2 weeks pay to cover you. Isn't it just quicker and easier just to make sure that you're safe, I'm safe, and that we go to work every day? A lot cheaper, isn't it? Cheaper for me, cheaper for you, cheaper for everyone. So, and that's what employers don't look at. They'll just look at, someone's off, this person's off, this person's off. But, a lot of those costs for sickness are hidden costs. They are costs which cost the company. They can also cost your colleagues because colleagues will have to work harder to cover those people while you're off. And it creates all sorts of problems, and wherefore if you make sure that the people are fit and well to go to work every day, then you've got a more productive workplace. You've probably got a workplace that will make more money, more productive, more money. I work in a workplace that doesn't make money, but it's got targets. We're expected to have productivity. We're supposed to hit targets. So if I'm fit and well to go to work every day, more likely that my employer's going to hit their targets than if I'm not fit and well every day, or my colleagues are not fit and well every day.
Well, that's the other thing as well, because the organization that you work for provides such a great value that is not necessarily seen in monetary value straight away. It's not like a sales target, where you hit the sales target, you get commission on it. This is something where the ripple effect is so everlasting. And that leads to basically the types of reps which are out there. When I first got into it, I was told about there's 2 types of reps. There's the reps who are active, who go out there, motivate, so on and so forth, and make sure things are okay. And you've got badge holders. And I encountered both types. The badge holders are only there, rep by name, and that is it. They'll sit in the canteen, have a cup of coffee or tea, and just take the absolute abuse the system would be the best way of putting it. Now, in your experience, you probably went through and encountered people who were like that. When you've got a rep who's active that's dealing with other reps who may be badge holders, what sort of advice have you given them in the past? because that can be quite demotivating.
I think what you have to do as a rep, you have to always focus on what your own role is, and make sure you focus on what your own role is. So I think it's very easy as an individual, whether you teach people, whether you're repping people, it's very, very easy to focus on what other people are doing and not focus on yourself. I think it's important that as an individual, you do what you can and do it to the best of your ability. If other people are not doing stuff to their best of their ability, let them get on with it. You'll find that organizations will find those people out, members will find those people out, but always focus on yourself. Don't focus on what other people are doing. Make sure that what you're doing is bang on the money, because if other people are not doing what they're supposed to do, I think eventually they'll get found out. They get found out by employers, they get found out by members, they get found out by the union themselves that those people are no good. It is very important to make sure that you always focus on what you're doing, not focus on what other people are doing. So yeah, absolutely.
That's good to know, and I hope that any rep who's listening to this gets that advice and takes it on board, because you can get caught up with a lot of politics, which also leads to the next point about politics, because trade union reps tend to go into the politics world. Quite a few of the Labour Party councillors, union reps, union activists, and navigating that, because a lot of politics is quite different to the world of trade unionism. Trade unionism is straightforward and simple in the sense of you want better terms and conditions, you want better employment, you want better wages, and do what you can to represent your members as best as possible. Not all the time the members are going to be absolutely innocent, but you want to make sure that the members are okay. They don't get dismissed unless it is gross misconduct and they have no choice but to be dismissed. Politics is different because you're not totally sure. It's always evolving, always changing. You're having to navigate different areas. And you've encountered you've spent a bit of time with political figures as well. What sort of advice would you give to those kind of guys who are aspiring into the world of politics?
I think it depends on what kind of side of politics you're on. If you're a trade union rep, I would hope that you're to the left in terms of your politics, but I suppose if you're more of a business person, you'd be more to the right. So again, it depends on what kind of aspect of politics you wanted to get into. In terms of if you were looking to become involved in politics from a trade union point of view, well, I would suggest that you need to think about what socialism is. You need to think about what fairness is. You need to think about what justice is, as opposed to maybe if you were looking at the right, maybe you'd be looking at the opposite of those. You might be looking at making profit. You might be looking at privatizing things. You might be looking at deregulating markets and getting rid of laws. So it depends on what side you're on. In terms of politics, if you're from a trade union point of view, then you need to speak up for working people. If you don't speak up for working people, I'd argue you're not doing the job that you've been maybe elected to do, or that maybe people will be looking for you to do. If you're on the right, then obviously you need to be pandering to those people on the right. And obviously we've seen at the moment all the stuff that's going on in the news, a lot of stuff that's going on in the news about the far right, but also about the left as well. I'm a trade unionist, so therefore my views and my feelings will always be to the left. It will never be to the right.
Okay, so let's get back to the politics. So when we're looking at politics, you do have the difficulty that there are members and even activists that will be on the right, not necessarily right of center, but a little bit more further to the right. And that can cause a little bit of issues. And I know I've had to personally deal with those kind of issues myself. I've had members come up to me saying that I can't be part of the union if you've got that guy in here representing us. And it's like, oh God, what do we do here? So with these kind of challenges that are taking place now, what sort of advice would you give to keep people level-headed in this sense?
I think, if you're in any elected position, so as a union rep, you're elected, or as a steward, you're elected, health and safety rep, you're elected, as a councillor, you're elected, as an MP, you're elected, but you're elected for a reason. And I think people need to think that, when you're elected to do a role, you are elected for a reason. And you may have had a manifesto, you may have told people what you're going to do or how you're going to change things. And I think it's important that, that you stick to that, whatever you said that you're going to be elected for or whatever.
And I think, sometimes with union reps, I think sometimes people forget the reason why they're elected. They're not always aware that it's an elected role. It's not like joining the KGB or the CIA. It's not a job for life. Yeah, it's not like no one ever leaves the union. People do leave the union. It's not like the KGB or the CIA. So, people need to be aware that if you're elected into a position as a union rep, you're elected in a position as a health and safety rep. What are you bringing to the table? How are you going to make things better for the people in the workplace? If you're elected as a councillor, local councillor, how are you going to make your local environment better than what it currently is? If you're an MP, what's your party stance on stuff? What's your stance on things? What are your political beliefs? I think sometimes people forget all this stuff. If you're elected as a rep, you're elected for a reason. If you're elected as a councillor, you're elected for a reason. If you're elected as an MP, you're elected for a reason. So people have to remember, well, what did they put forward? What do they believe in? And stick to that. And I think if people do that, then they should be okay. But if they don't, well, then people can, you can be booted out of office, in terms of being a union rep. You're elected for a certain period of time. You can lose the election. People might try and take over from you. Same as being a councillor. Same with being an MP. It's it's not a job forever. And I think sometimes people think because they've done it for a long time, they think that they're not touchable, or they kind of forget why they were put there in the first place. And I think it's important that if people are elected on a manifesto, people are elected on reasons they've given for standing up for whatever position they've done that for. They need to remember why they've been put there in the first place.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do tend to forget that. Complacency does set in for quite a few people, and it's good to have elections after a period of time.
Yeah.
Which now leads to continuous professional development, because you constantly teach different courses. You taught the Certificate of Employment Law, Shop Stewards course, Health and Safety Reps courses. How have you found teaching has changed, especially during the pandemic? Because there used to be classroom based, now it's Zoom, quite a lot of Zoom. How do you find teaching in that sort of Zoom environment versus classroom?
I've got to say, when I started teaching, because when I left teaching in 2019 and I returned in 2021, which was during the pandemic. Before I left teaching in 2019, I'd only ever taught in person. I'd never taught online. When I came back to teaching, all of a sudden, of course, we were in a pandemic. So of course, everything was online. So I had to learn very, very quickly how to teach online, because quite often when you teach, and I'm only saying this as an individual, quite often people just assume that you know everything because you're a teacher. Like anyone, you need to have training, you need to be developed. So I had to learn very, very quickly how I'd use Zoom, I'd use Teams as a person being part of a meeting. What I hadn't used Zoom or Teams for was how to teach people. So again, I had to learn very, very quickly how do you teach people on Zoom? How do you teach people? And I've got to say, this is what, 4 years now since I've been back to teaching. I find it quite easy to teach on Zoom and Teams and stuff. The only thing I find about Zoom and Teams when you teach people is sometimes people don't have the online skills, because I think sometimes people look at Zoom and Teams as being an easy option, easier than being in a classroom. I think actually you probably need more. You need more online skills to being in a online classroom than you ever do in a classroom full of individual people teaching people face to face. So I think when people come into online classrooms, if their online skills are not very good, then quite often they will fall along the wayside. But they often look at online teaching as an easier option. I'd say it's actually a more difficult option for a lot of people. So again, if your internet skills are not very good, your online skills are not very good, then it's going to be difficult for you. And certainly when I've taught courses for Unison, because Unison's the one I teach mostly online, quite often people don't have good online skills. And they've often said to me after as well, in future I might do a classroom-based course, or I might do this, or I might do that. But it's got its place. Online teaching its place. So yeah.
Is that an age factor, or is that basically, just because of the work that
No, I
people
just
do?
think it's experience. Yeah, I think it's just experience, you know. So, for example, online courses, quite often you'll find that sometimes people will use their phone for an online course. A phone is not suitable for an online course. You need to have a laptop. If you're just attending a webinar, then a phone or a tablet will be fine. If you're talking about interacting and doing coursework and being fully involved in a class, you need a laptop. So sometimes it may also be equipment as well. People don't have the right equipment, or maybe people's equipment's old. Maybe people have never used things like Teams or Zoom before, and maybe they're not used to the idea of being in a classroom full of people, because sometimes some of the classes I teach, you can have 20 people in a room, you can have 25 people in a room. So, you know, that can be daunting if you've never done an online course before and all of a sudden there's 25 people in a room or 20 people in a room.
I suppose, you know, because again, from my sort of background, having had to do things self-learning, you would learn things online, you do things via distance learning as opposed to a classroom. It was a bit more easier for me to adapt to that kind of thing. But I could appreciate if you've been out of the classroom environment for 10, 15 years, then suddenly you're thrown into it and it's a digital based environment. What you knew is now gone right out the window.
Hey everyone, you might be lucky to get safety boots from your employer. And these are absolutely fine to have, but guess what? They don't necessarily have the right supports and can leave you feeling aches and pains, especially in your arches at the end of the day, leading to fallen arches. So make sure you get some arch supports. These are useful. They slip into your boot and give the same comfort as trainers, enabling you to walk around all day long doing all the heavy lifting no matter what the job is that you're doing, and you won't feel any pain at the end of the day. They will leave you feeling really good at the end of the day, so make sure you order yours at the TikTok shop for the price of less than a packet of chips.
So I
Yeah,
suppose
yeah.
that must be quite daunting. But leading on from that as well is that with the courses at the moment, now we've got a new Labour government in place, but by the looks of things, funding is being cut for a lot of the adult-based education which is out there. How can the trade union movement address something like this? Because I think it's important that it should
I
be
think
addressed.
I think it's a difficult one. We've got all the employment legislation going through Parliament, ready to go into place next year. That's going to require reps to be trained. That's going to require reps to have knowledge, and it's going to require a lot of people to attend courses. So, in terms of funding, trade unions have got their own training programs. So, most of the trade unions that we work with, and you know, I work with lots of different trade unions, have got their own training program. But you also need to think about longer term courses to develop people further, because most unions that I work with have got basic courses. They don't have longer in-depth courses. So, you know, if people want longer in-depth courses, they'll need TUC training, because of course, even Unison run 3-day courses. They run 5-day courses. They don't run courses any longer than USDOR, GMB, very, very similar. You know, they run courses for 5 days at a time, but no longer than that. So again, you know, once people have done all their initial training, it's important that people's knowledge and their skills are kept updated, and that can be kept updated through their own union, but also through TUC training, because TUC training will maybe offer people training that maybe their own union won't provide. Maybe they'll meet people from other unions that maybe they wouldn't meet within their own workplace sector or their own union sector.
I will admit I have been exposed to far greater levels of thinking and awareness by going to these different conferences and meeting with different union reps. And it kind of, you know, I've been very fortunate and blessed to get where I am. But when you look at what others are going through in their sectors and you're wondering, I didn't know that you had that issue. I didn't know you had those issues. You know, the CW, Communication Workers Union, have completely different issues compared to, let's say, a public sector worker for the GMB. Completely different issues. And when you're hearing of their struggles, it's like, oh, wow. Even with unions like Equity and Bectu, which deal with the theatres and performing arts, completely unique to some of the things that are out there. And it's eye-opening. But more importantly, the motivation is very encouraging to see how people battle.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about the thing about equity is quite often actors are self-employed. So quite often when actors work on productions or they're working on a TV program, or you'll find that they're self-employed. So they're not employed by the production company. They're not employed by the TV station. They're self-employed. So, I mean, I did do a lot of work with equity in the early 2000s, where I met quite a lot of actors, and again, it's a very, very hard environment to break into, because you'll find now that a lot of television channels now rely on reality TV. So again, if TV channels are not making dramas, then they're not employing actors, they're not employing writers, they're just employing the members of the public. I think that's a hard environment to crack now, especially now that years ago, if you worked in TV many years ago, back in the 80s, it was what was called a closed shop. So if you wanted to be an actor, you had to be a member of equity, because no one would give you a job if you weren't a member of equity. Now, of course, you've got people jumping up to have the chance of being a reality TV star, because you've got all these reality TV programs and stuff. And of course, you don't need training to do that. People want their 5 minutes of fame. They can have their 5 minutes of fame. To be an actor, you've got to train. You've got to study. If you're writing and you're directing, all those things, those jobs are skilled jobs, and therefore they need skilled people to do that. Of course, if you're just getting members of the public to embarrass themselves on TV, which is what quite often happens now on TV, then all you need is a production company, but of course the public are the stars. You don't have to pay people that. You just have to maybe give them expenses.
Which is what I've found with some of the people that I've talked to who've worked within equity as well, and some of the other organizations out there. And quite frankly, some of them are quite scared about the threat of AI and social media. And even that, we're looking at it from the sort of perspective of, is AI now creeping in to take over various industries? Do you feel that AI is going to be affecting teaching, or do you feel that teaching will still be a person-to-person thing?
It's a difficult one, I really don't know. I mean, from what people tell me, could AI take over teaching? To a certain extent, maybe it could. I don't know. I think if you're using your voice, which is what acting is, or you're teaching, could a computer do that, or could a computer? I would say probably in terms of acting, people being on a stage, people being anything where people use their voice as their main kind of their main kind of tool, then yeah, the possibility is probably yes. If you're talking about people kind of talking, or people being online, could that be done by an AI person? Possibly, yeah. It's quite scary.
It is, but I feel that AI at this moment in time won't be able to have the intuitiveness to be able to spot, let's say, this particular difficulty. This guy can't grasp this concept. How do I, as an example, you helped with the whole right early on, the business models which are out there, the hidden costs and stuff like that. You broke it down into enough bite-sized chunks that anyone listening to this will be able to say, you're right, that's there. I understand that concept. I don't think AI is there to that level yet. And I think that's the
Well, it
difference.
might do. Yeah. I mean, if you look at retail years ago, when I worked in retail, the idea of having self-scanning checkouts, the idea of having these little scanners that people go in with and they don't have to go through the checkouts, that would have been something of science fiction back in the late 80s when I started working in retail. You'd have expected that to be on Tomorrow's World or something, or some kind of pie in the sky future program, but you wouldn't have expected it to happen. But if you look at retail now, there are shops now that don't have staff in them because everything's automated. You've got supermarkets now where they've virtually got no checkout staff because, of course, it's all self-scanning. You've got home delivery where people, again, don't even go to a supermarket. They just order their food online. So there's all this stuff that's kind of coming in, which is all kind of technology driven, isn't it? All technology driven stuff. And I would say that, in retail, there are a lot less people in a store now than there was when I worked in there. Less people on the checkout, less people filling up shelves, less people kind of, behind the scenes and stuff, all those people have now disappeared. So worrying, the idea of AI and technology replacing people should be worried about it. I think people should be.
And that's what I was going to say, which is kind of the scary thing. That is something I think we will have to be definitely looking at. I know there's certain trade unions they're looking at the moment. And I know from my sort of course that I've done, where I've done my assignment on social media, AI, this is for my diploma of employment law. These are the things that were coming out. It is, automation has always changed the methods of production. And that's not changing anymore. It is just now starting to increase. But now you're bringing in AI elements behind it, taking out human decision making. And what we're seeing currently is that certain junior level jobs or entry level jobs are now being made redundant. People can't get into those jobs because that's being taken over by AI at the moment. That's great news for the employer. But like I mentioned before, ultimately, as AI improves, it will go up the ranks. Then you won't need a CEO, you won't need a CFO, you won't need a board at all because it will be run by AI. And that's the funny thing
But
about it.
if you look at Royal Mail, if you went back 20 years ago, people were posting letters, people were posting, paying for bills and all that kind of stuff. If you look at, the Royal Mail now, what they deliver is very different to what they were delivering 5-10 years ago. They're delivering more parcels now than actual letters. I don't know about you. I get very few letters through the door now, probably about
It's
one a week, one every 2 weeks.
it's the
But I get
usual people
bombarded
for
with
me.
emails, right?
It's the
Yeah.
usual people for
But
me.
I'm just
Those
saying
are
that, in
parking
terms
ticket.
of, well, you know what? In terms of, that just shows you how technology changes things, right? So, there's less letters going through, but there are more people are sending more parcels. People are doing more online shopping. There's also more competition now because, of course, you've got you've got all these other companies that will deliver cheaper and may offer different alternatives to the Royal Mail. So there's all these things now that are kind of eating into that particular thing, whereas years ago there was just the Royal Mail and that was it. So it's scary to think that that all this stuff is going through.
Well, as we're coming close now to the end of the show, apart from, I always finish off on the positive, which is to get your views and opinions. Now, we've talked about this, but I want to find out from you what you see as a better tomorrow, either for education, business, politics, trade unionism, all of it. So, Fred, what
Wow.
is your better
Okay.
tomorrow?
So for education, I think really, for people to be as well qualified as possible, because one thing I've learned over the years, if you don't have qualifications, then it can really hold you back. So I think the younger people of today really do need GCSEs. They really do need A levels. Whereas I think back in my day, people didn't necessarily need that. I think if you're looking at the world of work, people need a trade union more than ever. If you're looking at the jobs that are out there, they're precariously, the conditions are precariously bad. Because when they talk about employment, what they don't talk about is people living on wages where they can actually live on. So if you talk about employment, if you're talking about people that how many people are on 15 hours a week, how many people are on 20 hours a week, how do people live on that kind of money? Yeah, so employment needs to be meaningful. I think if you're employed, if you can't afford to live and you can't afford to eat and you can't afford to pay your rent or you can't afford to pay your mortgage, you'd have to kind of wonder why people would bother to get up to go to work. Because if you can't get any of that stuff, what's the point? And when people say, what's the point of work? Certainly when I was growing up, the idea of going to work was if you want a nice house, you want a nice car, you want a nice holiday, you've got to go out and work. Well, there's a lot of people now that go out to work every single day, work all the hours God sends, and they've got nothing. So where does work fit into their life where you're working 100 hours a week or maybe more or just under that, and you can't afford to feed your family, you can't afford to go on holiday, you can't afford to pay your rent? That can't be right. So I think the world of work needs to be meaningful. It needs to be that people are earning decent pay that people can live on, that can actually have some kind of decent kind of lifestyle rather than just surviving, which I think A lot of people now are just surviving. If you're talking about politics, then I think politics, it needs to be for the people, and again, there's too many people, working class people, that are fighting amongst themselves. Trade unions aren't the enemy of working people. The far right are the enemies of working people. The far right politicians, the people that offer nothing to working people, are the enemies of people, not trade unions. Trade unions make sure that people have decent pay, decent conditions, and stand up for working people. And that's what all working people need to know. Yeah. So I suppose a better tomorrow is a government that actually listens to people, but also puts people at the heart of their policies, and an NHS that fully works, fully functions, an education system that supports people, a welfare system that supports people in times of need, a society that looks after people, that rather than sticks two fingers up at people that says, it's not my problem. And I think there's too many people in society now that kind of think, well, it doesn't affect me, so stick two fingers up at the rest of them. I'm all right. Who gives a crap about anyone else? And I think it's important that, it doesn't matter where you are in life. Could you be poor? Could you be rich? Could you have a really good job? Could you have a really poor job? It's like a massive wheel, right? So you need to think, well, it may not be your turn today. It could be your turn tomorrow. And people need to realize that. So, when people laugh at homeless people, or people, well, who's to say that in future you won't be a homeless people and people won't be laughing at you? Because, you put the right circumstances in front of people. You give people some wrong choices, or people have some bad luck. That could be any of us. So therefore, when you get people that laugh at poor people, they laugh at people that are kind of struggling. Well, you could be those next people tomorrow, and people could be laughing at you. So I would say that we need to have a more inclusive society. We need to have a society that helps each other. We need to have a society that works together rather than works against each other.
Wow. And that is absolutely as holistic as you can get. As well as that, I know you want to send a shout out to your favorite football team,
Eagles.
Crystal Palace. They're in Europe at the moment, so the first time in their history, they won the FA Cup last season, got into Europe this season, had
And
a
the
pretty
Charity
good
Shield.
start, and the Charity Shield.
And the Charity Shield as well this year.
Yeah, he's a lifelong Eagles fan, lifelong Crystal Palace football team fan. Guys, thank you for being with me for this entire hour. I hope that you've taken every bit of nugget of information. Fred is out there teaching. So if you're an aspiring trade unionist and you end up in one of his classes, you're going to get nothing but the very best from his sessions. I know I benefited from it. That's what I'm doing right now. I really do thank Fred for all the positive encouragement as well as the great life lessons out there. He's really inspired me to become one of the very best. On that note, guys, as always, whichever platform you're watching this on, like, follow, subscribe, leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought about this show. Is there a question out there that you think Fred can answer for you? If so, just drop it into the comments, because Fred is here to help, and so am I. And at the end of the day, we all want to create a better society and a better future, not only in our workplace environments, but out there as well. So if we can help, why not? And on that note, Fred, you have been unmatched on this episode, and thank you for being a part of this. So next time, guys, we'll catch up again.
Hadi.
No problems.
Take care.
See you there. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Unmatched podcast. Your support means the world to us. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Your feedback helps us grow and bring you even more incredible stories. And remember, if you're unmatched in your field and have a unique story to share, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me at hadi.naqvi@googlemail.com. Let's inspire others together.